Good afternoon and welcome to the Middle East Forum's webinar and podcast series Israel Insider with Ashley Perry. I'm Stacey Roman and I will be moderating this discussion. We're pleased to have Mr. Ashley Perry, advisor to the Middle East Forum's Israel office, join us here each Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern to update us on all the events going on in Israel. Mr. Perry will be giving us a briefing on current Israeli affairs for 15 minutes, then open it up for questions. Should you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. And now I'll turn the discussion over to Mr. Ashley Perry.
Thank you very much, Stacey, and good evening from Israel. I'm in a different location tonight because I tested positive for the coronavirus, so I'm in isolation, but here I am, and there's still lots to talk about. I'll start by saying, as usual, that when I give the subject to the people in the US at the beginning of the week or even at the end of last week about what we should talk about, as it happens so often, I'm forced to talk about something completely different because, 3 days or whatever it is a very long time in Israeli politics. And so this week is no different, although interestingly enough, I sort of predicted that there was going to be some sort of coalition crisis this week, although I was going to refer to something else. Originally, I was going to talk about the nation, the citizenship bill, which is basically would allow the interior minister to not automatically allow Palestinian spouses when they marry Israeli citizens. When anyone marries Israeli citizens, they automatically get Israeli citizenship, but there was a law a number of years ago due to security concerns. Due to security concerns, there was a special law created that would ensure that each case for the Palestinians would be seen individually. That ran out, but the government has tried to create that law again, something that was passed government by government. I think every 6 months it came up, but astonishingly or not, depending on where you sit, the government, the previous government, which is now sitting in opposition, voted against it, a law which they voted on many times, and in fact, members of the opposition passed. So it puts the government in a bit of a problematic situation, as they have a member, Ram, the Islamist party, and even some of the more extreme left-wing parties in the government that would not support it. There was talk of maybe some opposition helping pass this law, understanding this is potentially a matter of national security, but it didn't come up in the end this week. Negotiations are still ongoing, so it seems like it's going to be put off, even though there was a High Court ruling this week that basically said that Shaked should not be relying on a law that's now out of date by denying these spouses citizenship. But she said that that ruling is irrelevant because we're going to pass a law anyway. So we'll see what happens with that. But what did come up was something even more of a coalition crisis, and arguably the biggest crisis this coalition has seen since the beginning. What was it, 7 months ago? As is usual around this time of year, in the lead up to the Jewish festival of Tu B'Shvat, the New Year for trees, there's a lot of tree planting going on. And usually the organization JNF, Kakal, plants a lot of trees, and they plant a lot of trees, especially in the Negev desert. And every year they plant in different areas, primarily for environmental reasons, forestation, etc., etc. This year, they planted in an area which is officially state land, which means that they're officially allowed to plant there. But it's an area claimed by a certain Bedouin tribe called the Alatrash tribe. Anyone who knows the Negev area knows that there are a lot of Bedouin tribes that basically move from different encampment to different encampment. They claim land on as their own. Rarely, if ever, do they have any documented evidence of this. Most of it, they claim, is verbal. And even then, it's relatively unreliable. This particular clan had put in a claim for that land in 1973 or the mid to early 70s, and it's got no further because there doesn't seem to be too much evidence of it. Either way, this land has been deemed as state land, and they were building trees on it. Some of the Bedouins in the south basically became violent, tried to stop the tree planting. Threats were made. Cars were attacked on the main road. Certain areas of the south basically became battlegrounds. Even at one point, there was a disturbing instance of stones being left on a railway track going south, which was clearly an act of arson, if not terrorism, as being deemed by the police and the security forces. And the situation really got out of hand for 2, actually even 3 nights running, because apparently it's happening again tonight. There has been, real violence in the south. The police and security forces have come in. They've arrested dozens of Bedouins, mostly Bedouin youth, and it's created quite a problem. Now, it's a problem in of itself. So why has it become a coalition problem? First of all, because Likud, as we know, the main opposition party, tried to make hay of it, went down and did a public tree planting with their prominent members of the party. Netanyahu himself was not there, but some other relatively prominent members, Avi Dichter and others, and that obviously inflamed tensions further. But basically it became a coalition crisis because for Ram, the Bedouins of the south are really the bedrock of their political support. And for them, what they see as an attack on their way of life, on their lands, on their property, is something which they can't countenance politically. So they basically said, they threatened the coalition: if this doesn't stop now, we will balk the coalition. And moreover, they made good on their threat not to turn up to the Knesset today. And the Knesset was a busy day. There was lots of laws coming up to vote, and the whole Ram party decided to boycott the Knesset, which actually led to a member of Yamina, Nir Orbach, also saying, if Ram can boycott whenever they don't like something, so can I. So the coalition did not have a majority. They decided, rather than lose on narrow margins, they would just all leave the Knesset. So all of the opposition's party laws today that came up basically passed through. I think there were 7 or 8. So it was a major victory for the opposition. Are these laws significant? Are they going to be passed? Undoubtedly no, because they're not even up for the first reading. This is a preliminary reading. They have to go to committees. They have to be voted on 3 more times. So the overwhelming likelihood is none of these laws will ever see the light of day, let alone the legal books. But it was certainly a moral victory for the coalition, for the opposition. And what it does is it has created quite a rift. Prime Minister Bennett has tried to play it down, said that there was a disagreement. We're now past it. An agreement was reached, or at least a compromise was reached. Yair Lapid, Foreign Minister Yair Lapid, was centrally involved. He got Zev Elkin, who's the housing minister, who's in charge of this tree planting, to cease the tree planting itself. People like Zev Elkin, who are more right-wing, tried to climb down the tree and said, we planted all the trees that was meant to stop today anyway. It's probably unlikely that that's true, but it makes them save face a little bit. But it seems like the compromise has been reached, and it seems like tomorrow the government will go back to working as normal. That remains to be seen, especially tomorrow is not a Knesset day, so it's very easy, to sort of claim that agreement has been reached, compromises have been understood and everything like that. But we won't really know until next Monday, when the Knesset sits again, exactly what it means. What it does mean is there's going to be a lot of tension. This is really going to be a test for the coalition, because before there were always disagreements and a bit of flexing muscles here and a bit of beating chest there. But this is really the first time that it really has struck home to Ram that this is an issue probably bigger than all the others, because this really is the base, the foundation of their political support, as I said, the Southern Bedouins. So they really had no choice. And Mansour Abbas, who basically, he used language that said, I've taken a lot of flack over the last few months, but this was a bullet to my chest and I can't take it anymore. And that's why he took the extreme position of removing all members of Ram from the Knesset. Some of the other members, which are more extreme, let's say, took more extreme positions, said that this is the end of the government and there's no way we can work with them anymore. I don't think that's necessarily going to happen. I think Mansour Abbas, once everything has calmed down, at the moment on the ground, things haven't calmed down. There's still riots in the south. But what remains to be seen is whether this will have a lasting effect. What it certainly will say to the coalition, some of the coalition partners, is that this is a problem. This is, we saw that the first time that Ram didn't like something, they basically stood up and walked out. Does that give us license to walk out when we don't like something? What happens when Ram or a party on the left wants to bring up an issue and the right are against it? Do they also do that? A precedent to a certain extent was set today. And that could create a lot of ill feeling in a government where there are major ideological differences. And I think definitely it's going to have something of a lasting impression on this government. It remains to be seen exactly how much. As I said, Mansour Abbas seems to have understood that the situation, politically at least, as long as it doesn't get out of hand on the ground, is over for the moment, because the planting did stop. The opposition obviously, went to the media saying that this is, the government, Bennett, etc. They succumbed to terror, they succumbed to threats. This was a real, defeat, and this was not a good day for the state of Israel. The state of Israel should be able to plant trees wherever they want, especially on state land, and not give in to threats and to violence. And the rest, and that's certainly going to work well with their base, even though, as pointed out today, many times that Netanyahu did something similar when he was prime minister in 2020, and according to Mansour Abbas, he even promised to go even further and give the southern Bedouins more territory, recognize more and more of their towns and villages in the south if Ram would have entered a government with them. So there's a lot of back and forth on this. Finally, before we go to questions, it has to be the big story of the day, really, is that's got a lot of people talking, is the report in the morning by Ben Caspit, who's a very well-known journalist here, who basically released a certain amount of details on the potential for a plea bargain. As we know, former Prime Minister and leader of the opposition, Benjamin Netanyahu, is currently in court for 3 cases against him. There's been, it's quite a slow and arduous process. So far, they've only gone through a couple of witnesses, and this is going to take years. But it does seem, in the last few weeks at least, that the Netanyahu lawyers have reached out to the state attorney, who is Avichai Mandelblit. If you remember, Mandelblit is a former ally, friend, and head of, ran the coalition for Netanyahu before he was appointed state attorney. And then when he launched the indictments against Netanyahu, he became public enemy #1, not just for Netanyahu and Likud, but for many on the right. Mandelblit is ending his tenure at the end of January. There's a lot of speculation about why now. Some believe that Netanyahu is worried about who could come after. With Mandelblit, at least he knows him, and he thinks maybe he'll be able to get a better job, a better result. Mandelblit himself said he would like to leave his tenure with a clean slate, in other words, dealing with all outstanding issues. At the moment, there seems to be a breakdown in these negotiations, because whereas the Netanyahu team has offered, for them, the 2 things that are most important are that he receives no prison time and he doesn't get convicted of moral turpitude, which comes with it 7 years in the political wilderness. For 7 years, he can hold someone who's guilty of a crime of moral turpitude in Israel cannot serve in any political position for 7 years. We saw Aryeh Deri, former interior minister. He was convicted of a crime of moral turpitude, and he had to take a time out of 7 years, including a prison sentence. So that's something that Netanyahu very much wants to avoid. It seems that that's not what Mandelblit has in mind. It's possible that there's talk of maybe avoiding prison, maybe probation with a massive fine, but pleading guilty. Again, that would not play well into Netanyahu's promises over the years that there's nothing in this case, these cases are all made up. There's nothing, there will be nothing, I will be innocent at the end of the day. And his people have gone on, the media today to say that, why would he take a plea bargain when the cases against him are falling apart? It's clear that that's not what Netanyahu's legal team believes. And that's why there seems to be some movement on whether there's going to be a plea bargain. We will know in the few weeks until the end of the month if there will be, because it seems like there's a certain amount of eagerness on both sides to get this done before the end of Mandelblatt's tenure. But at the moment, the two sides are far apart. We'll see if they can meet in the middle at some point. But it does seem that there's certainly some movements. There could be some very dramatic news in the next couple of weeks to report. But with that, I'm happy to answer any questions on this or any other subject.
All right, thank you so much. So quite a few of our viewers would like to wish you a speedy recovery. First question, just a background question. Robert Slater asked, how do surrounding countries deal with the Bedouin land claims?
I'll be honest, I'm not really sure. That's not something I've ever looked into. I wouldn't even like to guess because I have no knowledge.
All right, thank you. Ken Miller asks, has the problems with the Bedouins presented any problems within the IDF, as many of the Bedouins are serving as trackers and border guards? It must be affecting the enlistment by the Bedouin youth.
What I have seen and understood is it does fluctuate depending on the situation. There are many Bedouin, especially trackers units, especially in and around the Gaza area, who are very motivated, very loyal soldiers in the IDF. Yes, when the situation is bad, enlistment numbers do go down because, as we know, Arabs do not have to serve in the army, but many of these Bedouins volunteer. And as I said, they're considered very highly professional and skilled at what they do. But certainly the situation on the ground does affect the enlistment numbers. It will remain to be seen how, as I said, how this particular episode plays itself out. But certainly in the past, when there has been flare-ups, there have been a lot of people who served in the IDF with distinction who have, asked the question, we served our country and now we're being treated this way or that way. But it's certainly, the Negev is probably one of Israel's greatest challenges, just to go into a few more details, because on the one hand, you have people, many of them very law-abiding citizens, but moving around, we live in the 21st century where people usually tend to live on registered land in recognized towns and villages, cities, but you have a population which doesn't necessarily play by those rules. Israel's tried to create towns and cities like Rahat and try to entice as many Bedouins in, and a certain percentage certainly has moved, but there's still a certain percentage that refuses to move, and they move around as much as possible, claiming different lands. Again, I'm not going to get into the legal issues. All I know is that the vast majority of claims do not have any written basis. They claim that there's some oral basis, but it's very difficult with a modern country to sort of deal with oral traditions that maybe go back a few generations, maybe even 100 years, but it's very unclear exactly what that means. It's a really hard issue to deal with, and anyone who goes down to the south to see where many of these encampments are moving, some of them are spreading out, some of them are creating new encampments, and then when they're taken down, which they are from time to time, the international media is mobilized, NGOs are mobilized, and it looks like it doesn't look good for the international eyes, and certainly Israeli politicians are sensitive to that. On the other hand, there are people who live down there, Arab and Jew, whose lives are very difficult because there's shootings, there's intra-clan violence, there's a sort of free-fall for many of these areas. So it's a very, very difficult problem. It's challenged many governments before, and this one will be even more challenging because you have Iran, which owes, as I said, much of its political support to the southern Bedouins. So it's certainly not going to be necessarily dealt with, even though Israel has this government has promised billions to invest in the Arab sector, not just to fight violence, but also to try and reduce the gaps between Jews and Arabs in Israel. So there's quite a lot in there for Iran in this government, and they certainly will want to at least get some of those successes and those achievements. On the other hand, if one of these big leaders of these clans will call up Mansour Abbas or one of his people and says, this is a problem, you've got to make it stop, or you will lose our support in the next elections, it's not something he can afford to ignore. So it's a very challenging situation. And we'll see if this particular episode calms down. As I said, on the ground, it's not calming down. But politically, at the moment, it seems like compromise has been reached. And hopefully next week, for their sake, that the coalition is able to move forward.
Right. And one last question on this. Dr. Isaacs sums this up well. We have a few questions about this, but essentially, in the deserts of the Negev, we know trees are planted to help combat desertification. Why would the Bedouins not want trees there?
Well, it's not that they don't want trees there. They don't want trees on their particular property. What they claim is their particular property. I think if it wasn't on their particular property, I don't think they'd have such a problem. But they believe that the trees are used to move them off their land. And what they claim is, this is their claim, that first of all, it's being built specifically on their land to deprive them of it. And in the future, if you build trees, then you can build other infrastructure and eventually build towns or whatever it is that would again keep the Bedouins off their land. They consider it a form of expulsion. The Israeli government considers it an environmental issue. So that's sort of where the issue settles on the two sides.
Thank you for perfectly clarifying that for us. Murray Feldman asked, did the Prime Minister recently warn that Israel should be prepared for a conflict in the north and Gaza in the near future?
Yes, I mean, he spoke to the Defense and Foreign Affairs Committee in the Knesset. The Prime Minister is relatively often invited to speak about issues like that. Most of it is usually off record, but as is de rigueur today, most of this stuff is leaked. So those comments were leaked. And what the worry is in Israel is if there should be any sort of steps taken against Iran from Israel, there'll be at least one, if not two fronts opened with Hezbollah, which is basically a sort of client organization of Iran, and Hamas, which receives a lot of support and resources and arms from Iran, which would obviously make it a lot more difficult. If Israel was fighting on one, two, or three fronts, it makes everything a lot more difficult. So that's what Prime Minister Bennett was referring to. That is certainly a worry amongst the security establishment.
Another question from an anonymous viewer. Has MK Chickley reconciled with Bennett, or will he eventually move to Likud?
He hasn't reconciled with Bennett, nor will he. I think the question is the second part is probably right. Eventually he'll move to Likud. It all depends on what his, let's just say, legal or political situation. At the moment, he hasn't been declared a sort of deserter from Yamina. If he's declared officially deserting from the party, that means he will not be able to run with any established party in the next elections. In other words, he would not be able to run with the Likud. He would be able to run on an independent party or a new party. So it all depends. I think, like everything, there's they're sort of leaving that open in the hope that maybe they can bring him across, even not in totality, maybe on certain issues they can bring him across. I think that's less and less likely, and it could be sort of in revenge. At one point, the Yamina party will officially designate him as deserted the party, as I said, which means that at least in the next elections he won't be able to run with the Likud or any established party. But on the few times that they have surveyed, asking who you'd vote for, and they put Shikli and a new party into the polls, he's polled relatively well. He's a relatively popular figure, especially amongst disgruntled Yamina supporters who are not happy about the fact that they are in this government. So he's basically taken a lot of that support. So it could be on his own he'll pass the threshold, but that's that remains to be seen because elections are not happening anytime soon. So obviously there's a lot of issues to be worked out between now and then.
And Eric asks, what kind of laws did the opposition try to pass today?
I can't remember exactly. I think there were some bureaucratic issues about payments for single parent families, all sorts of things. Again, the opposition generally isn't able to make pass any of its laws, and none of these laws will pass probably. It was more symbolic than anything, but every week there are dozens of laws that the opposition will try and pass, some of them just to embarrass the government, which we talked about in previous webinars, sort of laws just to try and embarrass the right wing or sometimes even the left wing or whatever it is. And sometimes they are substantive laws which they want to pass, which as a rule opposition laws by this coalition are not passed. So there was a sort of a mixed bag. And again, we saw, on a day where the opposition, which is largely right-wing religious, was claiming that the left, the government was succumbing to Arabs and all the rest of it. We saw, Ahmed Tibi, who is, a member of the Joint Arab List, celebrating with members of the ultra-Orthodox parties. So, there's a lot of gamesmanship going on in the Knesset today, but certainly today it was a big win for the opposition. But the likelihood is none of these laws will pass through the Knesset because there's still many, many different levels to go. And even though today the government wasn't able to get itself in shape to vote down these laws, undoubtedly at one stage in the future they'll be able to put these laws back on the back burner.
Thank you. And Ken Miller asked, I do believe that you discussed this earlier, but for anyone that came late, he quotes the title of an article. Mansour Abbas, who is head of Israel's United Arab List Party, said it's time for his countrymen to accept Israel's Jewish identity. Wouldn't this imply support of the citizenship bill?
No, not necessarily. I wouldn't say he supported Israel as a Jewish state. He accepted the reality. I think there's a difference. Even accepting the reality and saying we should get used to it and it is what it is, as I talked about, it really is crossing the Rubicon here. It's really a major step for a national Arab leader to go that far. But then to go as far as to accept the Palestinian, the Arabs will not be able to marry Palestinians and their spouses get automatic citizenship is obviously an issue which is close to, again, the political base of Mansour Abbas. So I think they may come to some agreement because Shaked obviously is taking one side of it and Mansour Abbas and some of the members of Meretz and others are taking another side. It could be they'll come to some arrangements at the end because the only other alternative is for the opposition to bring enough votes for this to pass. At the moment, that doesn't seem to happen, but the fact that there are talks on it shows that there is a possibility because it is considered an issue of national security. It is something which the intelligence agencies have said, this particular loophole has been used and abused by people who have then gone on to conduct terrorist operations. So it has been recommended by the security agencies. So, there is hope in the coalition that some responsible members of the opposition will vote for it. But under the current atmosphere, I think that's not the most likely at this point of view, but one never knows.
All right. Well, we only have a minute left here, and I know you're not feeling well, so let's close up a little early. We've come to the close of our webinar and podcast. Ashley, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you.
Of course, for our viewers and listeners, please join us Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern for a webinar with William Jacobson discussing when the Middle East Studies Association votes for BDS. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day.